All right, I'm hoping everyone can see the right screen. All right. So thank you all for attending this webinar to promote the release of a report that has been developed over the last year with our collaborators, which I will highlight in this presentation. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and I'd like to acknowledge the land on which we gather as the traditional unceded territory of the Maliseet and Mi'kmaq peoples. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1726. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship of peace, friendship, and mutual respect between nations. And please, I invite you, as this is a virtual event and we're joining from across Canada, to reflect and acknowledge on the lands in which you're joining from today. And thank you for that. Further, I'm pleased to be joined by our panel today of incredible speakers who join us with expertise and so much work and represent some organizations and agencies that serve and advocate for and with older adults. So we have Bénédicte Schoepflin from the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, Laura Tamblyn Watts from CanAge, Canada's senior advocacy organization, Marie Beaulieu from the Université de Sherbrooke, Joanne Blinco from the Alberta Elder Abuse Awareness Council, and Susan Walsh, who is the seniors advocate in the Newfoundland and Labrador Seniors Advocates Office. Just for a little bit of context to why we developed a report and why we're co-hosting this session today. So I'm manager of operations. My name is Jenna Roddick of the AgeWell National Innovation Hub, which focuses on advancing policies and practice and technology in aging. So we work with government across the country that have the aging file, so aging policy programs and services, and aim to connect with policy priorities with the research that's ongoing in those areas and to solve problems with certain issues. We are knowledge brokers and we aim to work with a variety of stakeholders and people to address complex challenges such as the one that we're here to talk about today. And I would like to also acknowledge the team that was involved in developing the report. So we had a project coordinator, Inobong Udofa Kennedy, one of our knowledge brokers, Patrick Patterson, as well as research assistant Amy Dodge had heavy hands in writing the report and the report development. So definitely want to acknowledge their contributions today as well. So as I mentioned, we identify kind of what governments are working on and invested in as it relates to policy issues. And elder abuse was brought forward in our engagement with government as well as AgeWell's Older Adult and Caregiver Advisory Committee. So we kind of started discussions on what was needed. We talked to organizations and research experts to understand what we could do. So we took a very collaborative approach from the beginning and a collaborative approach over the last year through many meetings and emails back and forth to develop this final report. And I would like to acknowledge all of the people that were on our task force and the organizations in which they represent. As well, we had a government review committee that really highlighted and helped support and validate some of the programs and things that exist across Canada that work towards the prevention and addressing elder abuse. So to get into our report, this is generally the structure of the report, but I'm not going to get into its contents so much. If you've seen and accessed the report so far, you'll see that it's about 70 pages. So we definitely won't get into too much of the details. I'll really highlight the last section, which is the section that highlights our goals. But the three sections, just briefly, the background really highlights the prevalence and what is known about abuse towards older adults, social drivers of abuse, and the impacts. And then we highlight the system around abuse of older adults. So the global approach really speaks to the work being done on the UN Convention of the Rights of Older People. And then Canada's approach highlights the relevant legislation and frameworks and programs, as well as the organizations and networks that exist to address elder abuse. So that's all highlighted in section 2. And then the recommendations were compiled from a lot of sources that were guided from our task force that we reviewed. We compiled a larger list of recommendations that then kind of translated into these 5 overarching goals that we'll really dive into today. And for the purpose of just giving kind of the key messages that kind of came out of our report, but as well, if you're joining with a new interest in learning about the issue of abuse towards older adults, then these kind of key messages highlight what we know about it. So abuse and neglect of older adults is not limited to criminal offenses. It includes acts or lack of action in a trusted relationship which cause harm or distress of an older adult. There are many forms of abuse, which include physical, financial, sexual, psychological, emotional, as well as neglect. But it's also important to highlight the limitation in this statement or definition, in that it's not always just trusted relationships in which abuse can occur. So that's important to highlight as well. Abuse happens outside of trusted relationships or that kind of dynamic. And then ageism is a key driver of abuse. So combating ageism has been identified by many governments and organizations, including the UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons, as a goal. And the experience and occurrence of abuse can have many drivers, such as a person's sex, past experiences with abuse, their ethnic, cultural background, or socioeconomic status, can all influence a person's experience of abuse or neglect. And a common stat cited is that 1 in 10 older adults experience abuse or neglect each year. And those who are collecting data or case management are showing that this number is rising, even though prevalence data is typically, as we know, an underreporting of the real prevalence of abuse that occurs. So that's very important to note as well. And lastly, abuse of older adults is a violation of human rights, and it creates major health concerns. It contributes to isolation, poor mental health, and inactivity. These in themselves are very negative impacts of abuse. However, they also lead to other negative health outcomes and life outcomes as well. So it's important to note and acknowledge that, as well as non-governmental prevention and response networks and community organizations exist that play a vital role in prevention, education, providing resources and supports for people, as well as their caregivers and families and friends. And this is highlighted from section 2 of the report in the system map. And we acknowledge those, as well as the CNPEA and Future Us roadmap also highlight the networks that exist. And then federal, provincial, and territorial governments have implemented a variety of strategies and programs to address abuse, in which we highlight the strategies and programs that exist in section 2 of our report as well. So we'll go deeper into the goals, but 5 goals came out of our analysis of the recommendations and our engagement with our task force and review committees. So I'll go into the 5 goals a little bit more specifically, and then we'll hear from our panelists who have a lot of expertise and nuances to share related to these topics. So goal 1 is sustained funding for prevention and response networks. So these organizations have been established and operate from a variety of funding sources. So government funding such as the New Horizons for Seniors program. It was discussed in evaluations that we reviewed, and in our task force that project-based funding is challenging and not sustainable for providing the nature of services that networks provide. The Future Us roadmap developed by the CNPEA discusses this, as well as proposes a cost-sharing model between province and territories and the federal government. These commitments and investments would be extremely positive as a step forward to addressing elder abuse. And goal 2 is the establishment of a federal seniors advocate office, as well as provincial and territorial offices where they're not currently established. There are currently 3 seniors advocate offices. So in Newfoundland and Labrador, which we have the seniors advocate on our panel today, as well as New Brunswick and British Columbia. So CanAge's policy book proposes this recommendation to establish offices in each jurisdiction. And this would support a coordinated and collaborative approach and efforts on many seniors issues, which include, but are not limited to, the abuse towards older adults. We highlight the role of advocates' offices in section 2 of our report, and a key role that they play is in oversight and leadership for issues involving older adults. Goal 3 is to amend legislation to protect all older adults. So the criminal code does not cover abuse towards older adults. Previous amendments that were made added vulnerability resulting from age in their language. However, it's not specific to all older adults. So amendments should explicitly include abuse towards older adults, and measures implemented to address the need for training and education for those who enforce and practice the law. And lastly, to clearly define mental capacity and abuse of older adults in APPTA, which is an act that relates to data privacy. And goal 4 for improved reporting and standardized data. So as I mentioned prior, underreporting is an issue. There's a lot of complexities and nuance to why underreporting is an issue. There's some recommendations that highlight the infrastructure and standardized data collection procedures as important, as well as the need for really a lot of awareness and education and supports that people need to be in a position to report abuse that is occurring to someone they know or themselves. People may not report abuse occurring to themselves if that means they will no longer have the supports that potentially that person is providing them. So it can be very complex and kind of underpin the reasons why underreporting happens. Along with this, further longer term research funding is needed to include underrepresented populations in data collections and sampling. So the development and validation of measurement scales by type and forms of abuse, repeated measures over time, the use of multiple methods to reach respondents, and sampling that's representative of the Canadian population would improve quality of prevalence data. This could also include collecting disaggregate data that allows analysis that takes into account marginalized, racialized, and gendered older adults, and to help minimize gaps in data collection across populations. and the inclusion of a life course approach in data collection methods. This goes back to the point made relating to past experiences of abuse occurring and influencing future experiences of abuse as an older adult. So a life course approach aims to highlight and take that into account. And goal 5 for improved awareness and education to combat ageism. So as we know, ageism is a driver of abuse towards older adults and influenced by both ageism towards older adults, but as well self-directed ageism. The Decade of Healthy Aging identifies combating ageism as one of its 4 critical actions. And then there's a lot of effort and recognition for a UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. A UN Convention and its laws will offer protection to older adults, combat ageism, guide all levels of government policymaking, improve accountability, and empower older adults. Included under this goal and mentioned prior is the role of prevention networks and organizations who do play a vital role in that improving awareness and providing education to the public. And in closing, I think a very important thing that we've learned in this process, as well as just to highlight, is with an increased awareness and education, it must be paired with intervention support and an increase in intervention support. So as I mentioned, if someone is reliant on specific supports from a person and ends up leaving an abusive situation but loses those supports, that is critical. So increasing awareness and education and thus increasing reporting needs to be paired with those intervention supports as well. So coordinated and collaborative efforts need to be made. In our report, we highlight some examples and models that exist across Canada and highlight those opportunities for further change. So if you didn't have the report or can't find it, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to direct you to the link on our website or send you the PDF version. Or if you have any further questions after this panel, also please feel free to ask those. And without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen for a bit. And with that, to transition to Bénédicte here with the Canadian Network for the Prevention on Elder Abuse, as I highlighted the role of networks kind of throughout my presentation and through the report and task force engagement, we've really learned how integral networks are to prevention and response efforts. So can you talk about your work with the Canadian Network for the Prevention on Elder Abuse and how you engage with the public and other stakeholders?
Sure. Well, hi, everyone, and thanks, Jenna. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to try to keep things short because I can easily start talking and never stop when it comes to this. So CNPEA, Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, is the sole pan-Canadian network that's focused on the prevention of elder abuse and neglect. The only one. It was the only one 20 years ago. It is still the only one today. And I want to say it's not just about us. Of course, I will talk about CNPEA, but whether we're talking about national network or the provincial or the territorial networks, they play a very significant, unique role, which is that of public education and community coordination. So that means it's not necessarily providing direct services, it's connecting the people in need to the right services. It is connecting various stakeholders and different people across sectors together for a better coordinated approach. It's really doing that work of putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So our mission is similarly, it's focused to build awareness, support, and capacity to get to a coordinated pan-Canadian approach to elder abuse prevention. And if the report is any indication, you know that it is a big or tall order because it is a rather complex issue and also a very diverse answers and systems all across the country. So our work is, for that reason, is focused on knowledge mobilization, policy reform, and education. And in part, that means kind of reframing the way we think about aging and about older people in our communities. You know, how do we integrate them or not? How do we talk about aging? You know, and ageism is a big piece of the puzzle I was talking about. And it's also about promoting the rights of older people to ensure that they have the support they need to thrive and to live free from violence and neglect. So we've been around, as I mentioned, for over 20 years in different shapes and forms. And in 2015, we launched CNPEA.ca, which is a knowledge sharing hub, again, the only one of its kind. And it's a clearinghouse for information, for best practices, for existing support services, for individuals, and for the people who care for them. It's the goal of creating this, and that's one of that became kind of the heart of our activity, really, was to create a unifying common space for people, to create a community of practice for professionals across the country, and to kind of build a cohesive group and a cohesive knowledge base for everyone, to save people the stress when they are on an individual or family looking for information, to kind of help them find what they need faster. And when they are professionals, to try to break through that sense of isolation that can come with the work of prevention of abuse in general. So essentially, we are kind of set up as a backbone that's connecting with networks at the provincial or territorial level and kind of flowing information around between us so that it can then be shared further as well. And so for us, that means when it comes to the public education angle, we're talking about a program of webinars that is entirely free year-round. We're talking about more targeted training sessions with smaller groups. We're talking about collective projects that are a lot of our work, where we get to collaborate with organizations that share, do wonderful work in various fields and who have that additional expertise or lens that kind of enriches our projects. It's something that is it's kind of constellation, I would say, of people kind of working together and pushing together in the same direction. And when you're talking about networks, and here again, talking across the country, you're talking about very diverse formats, but you're always talking about citizens and professionals from a variety of sectors who are working together to address the issue of elder abuse. So it's, as I said, it's the public education angle. It can be putting in place workshops from something like the It's Not Right Neighbors, Friends and Family program, which is pan-Canadian, tested, time-approved. And it can be also community-specific programs that really respond to the needs of the people of the community, whether it is cultural, linguistic, etc. We're talking about convening service providers, working across sectors to be a bit more efficient and to stop working in silos and screaming into the void. And also, they participate in a lot of the knowledge mobilization and the flow of information with their government as well, with us, with the federal government, with the provincial government, territorial governments. It's an important resource. It's a huge resource for communities and for decision makers. So it's kind of a look at the tackling the issue through kind of a collective action angle and contributing ideas and experience and innovations at any turn, any chance we get. This said, and that's something that is in Future Us and that we kind of synthesize as well in the APPTA report, there's not a network in every part of the country. You know, there are technically only 6 provincial and territories, provinces and territories that have a network: BC, Alberta, Northwest Territories, Ontario, Manitoba, and Newfoundland, Labrador. So they're all doing the heavy lifting to educate and engage their communities, and doing amazing work. But there are parts of the countries that just do not have access to that yet. And even for those who exist, out of the 6 that exist, only 4 receive varied amounts of annualized funding for the work that they do, usually from provincial territorial governments. So that's and we see the difference if you're looking at, and this is not to shame anyone, of course, but if you're looking at certain provinces like BC or Alberta, who have made regular yearly investments that can be counted on, the scope of the work and the successes that can be achieved they speak for themselves. They're really the best argument in favor of sustained funding for those networks. And then when we talk about local networks, more often than not, we're talking about groups of volunteers who are doing this at the side of their desks. So this is a pretty crucial mission, and a lot of people working really hard, but in very, very limited and tight conditions and budgets, especially. Does that answer your question? Because I could keep going.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we do have a few minutes as well for a follow-up question, because I'd like to know, and I think you highlighted it, but what is the biggest challenge you face representing Canada's only national network, but as well with your engagement with other networks? What is the biggest challenge that networks face?
I mean, we are all stretched very thin, and there was definitely an increase in need and an increase in demand for all of us during and after the pandemic. But you will be positively shocked when I tell you that our biggest challenge is funding. It is, we are doing what I consider critical work to try to address an issue that is a systemic societal issue that affects a staggering amount of people, and which is going to keep growing as our population keeps aging if we don't do anything. But we currently operate without any sustained funding. So we are entirely dependent on project work for the bulk of our work and our projects and our everyday activities. And of course, donations from generous supporters. But that is not a steady enough base to work, because we all know project funding is wonderful while it's there, but when it ends, the contractors and the people and the resources that you had access to for 2, 3, 4 years are done. So it's a bit of a feast and famine cycle that does not allow us to do as much as we would like to do. We accomplish plenty on a very tight budget, but there's knowing what could be done and how much more we could step up in that backbone organization kind of role and provide such a stronger base across the country if the funding was there, of course. So, and I think that's something that can be said for a lot of organizations and networks across Canada, because every community needs a dedicated funded network that can hold the focus on elder abuse and on ageism, and that can do that long-term work. But long-term work cannot be done and should not be left strictly to volunteers. They do an amazing job, but they also should be paid for doing that work. It's too important of an issue to let it be something that people have to do on the side of their desks when they're already facing crunch and facing burnout. I think we can do much, much better than this.
Thank you. And absolutely. And we have linked some things to the chat. We've linked to the report, and as well as the CNPEA website. And I can try to also grab the link to the Future Us roadmap.
Happy to add it.
If you have been, absolutely, that's fantastic. If you're able to with the permissions, but let me know if you can't.
I think I can only send it to hosts and panelists right now, but I guess you can always just copy paste it.
Yeah, copy paste. Perfect. So thank you so much for that. And hopefully we have the time to loop back and discuss more. But for now, I'd love to leave kind of move the panel along to Laura and CanAge. So just to highlight another thing that we found in our report is that the Criminal Code of Canada does not have a specific elder abuse charge, and the majority of provincial and territorial adult protection acts are its blanket coverage of all older adults over the age of 18. I was wondering, from your work, what are the key legislative pieces that could help move the needle to better protect older adults from abuse? Laura?
Thanks. I'll try to make the law stuff interesting, I promise. So let's talk a little bit about what the legal frameworks are. As we talked before, we've got kind of two sets, right? We've got one in the criminal space, which is the Criminal Code of Canada, and we've got another chunk of them around something to do often with adult guardianship. Sometimes there's specific legislation that leans in as well of people who have mental capacity issues. Sometimes the public guardian trustee legislation plays in here, but let's take those things apart. First, let me start off by talking 2 seconds about what CanAge is, and then share as well that policy book that we were talking about before. So I'm hoping that you're seeing on the screen part of CanAge's website. And this is a piece I just wanted to share with you because you can use it too. So as we were trying to develop what are the key issues in Canada for older people, we came up with something called the Voices of Canada Seniors. And you can see these 6 compass points here. I want to take a particular point, of course, and talk about the V for violence and abuse prevention. But I want to share with you some of the other areas as well, because as we're thinking about what structures exist, either legislative structures or aspects to this problem, there's often other pieces involved. So if we're talking about, for instance, financial elder abuse, you're going to be also interested in looking in the economic security piece. If you're looking at some of the aspects around physical safety or care or housing, you're going to want to look at the C as well. But I just want us to jump in. So you can double click on this as you see, and it will open right up and it will share a couple of the key aspects that we're talking about that we referred to in the opening. Certainly will be of no surprise, just building on Bénédicte's presentation, that the overall awareness issue is here. And we are joined today by one of our provincial counterparts as a seniors advocate, and you'll see that that's one of the recommendations as well, to make sure that we have a seniors advocate in each province and territory as well as federally. So we're not doing a great job, as you see on that. We also, of course, are talking about the need to support that elder abuse campaign, that national awareness raising. I mean, CNPEA can't do all of it, and our colleagues here and those of you who are joining all raise our voices as much as we possibly can, but we need to have that more a consistent approach. You'll see as well that, conversations about where to go are really important. There was in the mandate letter of the federal government under the seniors portfolio, a hotline, which was supposed to be funded, which would then help people who were trying to figure out where to go to and send them back to the provincial or territorial wayfinding. But for all that has been promised, it has not come yet. Really where the rubber hits the road is around making sure that we actually have appropriate responses. And this is kind of where we fall into this, who gets these cases and what is the jurisdiction around these cases as well. So you'll see my recommendation, which I hope would look very familiar to Bénédicte and other colleagues. We need to make sure that there are jurisdictional representative bodies across the country and across the individual different jurisdictions as well, to support issues around abuse and neglect organizations, because without them, there's rarely anyone to kind of hand off to, and people don't have that opportunity for knowledge mobilization. We used some old data at the beginning that 1 in 10 people will suffer sort of some form of abuse and neglect is really pretty outdated. We are much more convinced that something much closer to 1 in 6 people will have abuse and neglect across their life course. If it comes to financial abuse, it's much more likely 1 in 4 people will experience financial abuse. And the reality is the National Prevalence Study, which I was playing a very small role in back in 2015, we only looked at people who had no cognitive impairment, and also we only looked in the community. So I think we can all look back on the pandemic and look at how people in congregate care settings may have had a very different experience around that. We also collect very little data in this area. So really having to focus on that research is pretty important. When we're talking about financial institutions, we do have, and I hope that you pay attention to this, little flag meant to here, a seniors banking code that is a voluntary code, so it's pretty soft, but all of the financial institutions that are banks need to report in. So there's some federal support there around elder abuse. But other than that, we end up in this kind of open space. So one of the big questions we've been talking about for a long time is, should Canada have a criminal charge for elder abuse? And this is a hot button topic because there's, some agreement in some cases, but lots of folks have differing opinions about this. So let me put on my lawyer hat for a second and just say, look, are there things that are criminal in elder abuse? Yes, there are many things that are criminal in elder abuse. If you hit somebody, no matter what their age, you're going to have assault and battery. If you steal their money, you're going to have theft. If you steal their money by using a power of attorney document, that is a little used provision of the criminal code, section 331, which is theft pursuant to a power of attorney. If you're kidnapping someone out of their long-term care home and taking them away, that's kidnapping, right? So we have all of these sort of underlying offenses. We also have an existing offense, which is used very rarely, that if you have any kind of organization or institution that's in the care and control of somebody, then if you neglect that or you cause them harm, there is that criminal code provision. It already exists. It's not really used so much in the context, particularly of older people, but it is something that exists. It comes way back into corporate law about organizations and companies doing things like befouling water with toxic waste, but it's the same kind of set of criminal code provisions. So you think to yourself, well, okay, we have all these underlying offenses. We have all these things that you could use. Why are we even talking about a specific criminal code provision? Part of the problem, and I do teach police across this country, is that they have a really hard time charging. And there is a gap. So yes, financial exploitation, it could be fraud, but it might not be. It could be theft pursuant to a power of attorney, but it may not be. It could be forgery, but it may not be. The reality of the circumstance is there's a whole bunch of stuff, kind of undue influence, exploitation, that there is this sense that there's a gap. So that's kind of one of those things, because you don't create a new criminal charge if something already exists. One of the arguments we often get against a specific criminal code provision, and this is, something that really needs to be taken into account, is if we have an elder abuse charge specifically, then perhaps it will lead to increased ageism by police. And what that means is they'll say, doesn't fit the elder abuse charge. And I see that this person is 75. So I'm not going to pursue it because I don't think it meets this elder abuse charge. And I'm not going to pay attention to things like assault, battery, theft, fraud, forgery, kidnapping, and so forth. But there are provisions that are specific in the criminal code. And as we've evolved in our thinking, particularly when it comes to children, there is a specific set of charges. When it comes to vulnerable women in domestic violence, there are now a specific set of charges. So what this government and previous governments have talked about for a long time is, are we ready? We've got some of these gaps. Are we ready for a specific criminal charge? And that was something that was brought forth in 2022. And a lot of us across the country, and I really recommend you have a look at this if you're interested in what people said. It was under the JUST, J-U-S-T, and I could put it in the chat as well. And it was the Justice Committee, and it was looking at what do we need to do for abuse and neglect. And it will surprise you not at all to know that, a lot of the people focused on not just only thinking about a criminal charge, but developing a national elder abuse and neglect response strategy, the way that we've done for child abuse and domestic violence. It won't surprise you to note that investments in things like domestic violence and child abuse should also be found for people who have elder abuse. But in the end, there has been this idea that there's this something else as well. Police and Crown, our prosecutors, say it's hard to bring elder abuse cases to the fore right now. And some of the recommendations have been to make sure that there's specific Crown Counsel that have dedicated training the way we do for domestic violence and child abuse as different areas, and that there be judges with specialized training in this as well. And there's very little specialized judicial training, but it's one of the key recommendations. There has been a little bit around elder abuse in the past, but not a lot. So what would a criminal charge look like? Well, there is some thinking that we can bulk out, make a bit more strong this idea that's trying to usually capture where a person has been living, like in a long-term care home, but not perhaps only a long-term care home, or that you have this care and control. So maybe it is that you're taking care of an older person, maybe it's a family member, and not only do you fail to take care of them, but that you've got some type of agreement or it's your obligation to take care of them. And that this perhaps could lead to a specific criminal charge. Certainly, I know that a lot of people have been very passionate about this when we saw the military going into long-term care homes. But in effect, actually, long-term care shows us what's going on. What we don't see is, grandma and grandpa who've been moved into the basement or moved out into an unheated garage. And those cases are, in fact, far less seen than the ones where you may have some type of accredited facility. So it could not only necessarily be just some kind of institution, but it's where that requirement to provide care is. That would be somehow different than failure by the necessaries of life. I'm just going to wrap by saying that we've had a bit of a curveball. And despite the fact that this really good report went through and that there was increasing agreement that perhaps a criminal charge might specifically work within this aggregate of funding and support of Crown, funding and support of victim services, making sure that there's a national elder abuse strategy, making sure that there is dedicated expertise and supports. So making sure that, it's not just the only thing you do, but it's one small thing that you do. And that is, last year, Hedy Fry brought forward to the Parliament a very, I would say, inflammatory, and perhaps in my personal view, urgent bill that was trying to get at some of her anger around what happened during the pandemic in long-term care. And again, in my personal view, and I'm on the record in saying it kind of conflated the idea of for-profit and not-for-profit ownership of long-term care with this idea of criminalizing the relationship with long-term care and people there. And it looks like this piece of legislation may come into effect. And I think, this is, one of the things we're really afraid of, because now it looks like, for instance, if you're on the board of directors of a not-for-profit home, you could be personally liable for some type of abuse and neglect that happens in the home that you're in. So a really broad set of unintended consequences. In closing, we also have all of these adult protective legislation, and they are always going to affect people with mental capacity issues. They're not going to just swoop into your house and save you. Or if you're in a very violent and concerning situation, they may play a role if you need someone to make decisions for you if you can't. But again, they're very inconsistent across the country, and they're not something that we can easily plan to do. So if you're thinking in that civil space, we need to be thinking about making powers of attorney document. And just to let you know, only about 1/3 of all Canadians have advanced plans. So wrapping this up, should there be an elder abuse charge? That's a personal opinion. There's lots of good thinking on it. And I recommend the Just Committee reports, and I'll send them to you. But in the meantime, we've kind of got this curveball, and it is only looking at the liability of long-term care homes. And I think it's going to come up with a very strange law that we're all having to work on. Again, I'll put all the links in the chat.
Thank you so much, Laura. And yeah, I think you'll be able to put it to the host and panelists, but we'll recopy for the rest of the attendees. And we do have a question based on your presentation that we'll get to after all the panelists. I see it in the Q&A there, so I just wanted to acknowledge that. And next we have Marie Beaulieu. So a recent announcement that was made was the release and the work on the federal definition of abuse towards older adults. And Marie, you led this work along with another colleague. So can you briefly, as brief as you can, with the size of the report, tell us about this work and some of the priorities you feel are important to highlight for our audience?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. And yeah, I'm going to try to give you in about 5-6 minutes. So in a nutshell, the highlights of this report. It came out just last month. It's a report that I've been doing with Kevin Saint-Martin, and it's published by Employment and Social Development of Canada. So this is the first page of the report. If you type this in the internet, you will find it quite easily. It's a 20-page report. It contains 8 different sections. And today I'm going to go mainly towards the definition and why was this done and where is the Canadian government right now. So as you can see, it's a federal policy definition. So a federal policy definition, already there you have a cue that there's a series of provincial definitions that do exist, and that it was important to have a common definition for all the, I'm so sorry, my watch is ringing, so I'm just stopping it. So it was really important to have a common definition, try to see if we can have a common language. Definitions do evolve. So I'm trying to, okay, here it is. Definitions do evolve. So it's normal that the words will be changing and that the content will be changing. And usually definitions will evolve because we acknowledge new knowledge coming not only from research, which is my background, but mainly from people in the field of practice that see different forms and types of abuse, that want to actually address nuances, that want us to cover broadly what is going on. And one of the things I have in mind is regarding financial abuse. Well, when I started my career 35 years ago, there was no internet. Now we see that there's a series of frauds and scams that are really targeting older person. So I will read you the definition that is in the report. So the federal policy definition on mistreatment of older persons presents the opportunity to provide federal leadership and also share a common understanding on this issue. It is intended to serve as a vehicle for cultural change and public awareness in support of efforts to prevent the mistreatment of older persons and to help inform federal policies and programs aimed at countering this issue. So I think many of you have been consulted, but in 2021, there was that major national consultation in the field trying to see how do we define mistreatment of older person. And also last year, there was the release of a report called Enhancement of Canadian Data on the Abuse of Older Person, an exploratory study. I had the chance to do that story, and we did a series of interviews with people from each provinces and territories of Canada, also practitioners, researchers, Canadian researchers, but also international researchers. And what comes out is really the diversity of words used, but also a real profound urge to have something in common that we can talk about. So here's the new definition that has been adopted by the Canadian government. Again, I'm saying as a policy definition. So it's mistreatment of older person is a single or repeated event that involves a person, a group, a community, or an organization, and occurs within a relationship where there's an expectation of trust, when an act, word, attitude, or lack of appropriate action causes or risks causing negative consequences for an older person. It includes events of physical, psychological, financial, or material and sexual mistreatment that can be expressed in the form of violence, and violence is act, word, or attitude, or neglect, lack of appropriate action. So I'm certain you feel that a certain number of things here would need some clarification. I will just give you a few hints and we can come back in the definition and the discussion later on. So now we're less talking about elder abuse. Both the terms elder and the term abuse have been contested. There was a lot of work around older persons and actually older adults, and also trying to avoid, like I say, elder or seniors. And actually the Canadian government has decided to go with elder person because it's the term that is used by the UN. However, I can tell you that older adult was clearly quite commonly accepted. Regarding the term mistreatment, it is seen now as something more general, more broad, and that includes both violence and neglect. It's a term that is used more widely all around the world. And there's two research chairs in the field in Canada, and both are using mistreatment in their title. Like other definition, the definition is talking about something that is single or repeated. One of the things that is shifting is that we recognize now that mistreatment doesn't only occur within an interpersonal interaction. It can be with a person, with a group, or community, but also an organization. That broadens actually the conception that we have of the dynamics of elder abuse. And the other thing that I want to stress is the fact that it can be an act, a word, an attitude, or a lack of appropriate action. It's not only a lack of action, but really appropriate action. So it covers different ways of doing abuse. And finally, no surprise, the risk of causing negative consequences. And by consequences, you will find it in the report. There can be physical consequences, psychological consequences, material or financial consequences, and also social consequences. I will give you a last little bit of information and we understand also that there's key influencing factors when we want to understand what is mistreatment of older person. We can have a discussion on what is chronological age. How can we include diversity and intersectionality? The importance of the context where it will happen, and Laura has been actually talking about a series of contexts. The importance of ageism, I think all the speakers talked about it. The fact that there's violation of rights in about every situation of mistreatment of older adult, and it's more and more considered, and actually it's an issue at the UN open-ended working group on the rights of older person. And also we have to reframe what we see for older adults in something that will affect all ages and all contexts. So it's the broad field of interpersonal violence that is been affected. And in certain countries, like in France, their definition is covering mistreatment towards children, towards adults, towards people with disabilities, and towards older persons. So maybe it's something that we could consider in further work. So I'm going to stop here. Actually, I've tried to be very brief, but I'm more than open for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie. And yes, we will definitely have time at the end to open the floor to the panelists as well as the questions from the audience. I will start sharing my screen here with the presentation for Joanne. And just as I transition here, Joanne, one thing that we learned through our engagement with the report is the work of coordinated community response models. So I look forward to hearing about this model and how it's been implemented so far in Alberta.
Perfect. Thanks, Jenna.
So, oh, I guess I just need to share my screen first. There, do you see your slide now?
I do. Thank you. Thank you for having me today. And like Jenna said, I'm going to give you an overview of what our CCRs are in Alberta. So we're coming up on 10 years since the coordinated community response teams have been established in Alberta. So in 2014, that's when the government announced that there would be 3-year funding for communities to be able to establish those CCRs across the province. Between 2015 and 2018, we had 30 communities that were funded across the province. These coordinated community responses, what they were able to do is some resource mapping, knowing what each person within that community would do. We also, in that period of time, took a look at the issue of awareness, bringing NFF to Alberta during that time, as well as some effective prevention strategies within those communities, with our overall goal of increasing the safety and security of older people in Alberta. Next slide then. So coordinated community response in Alberta started with a coordinator. And the coordinator, like I said, built those teams by accessing community and finding out what resources were in those communities, and then themselves being able to coordinate some of the services that older adults might need within that community. There was a team then collectively that was able to come together. Some of the communities built it just for the community by itself, and others did a regional response in terms of bringing together a whole region of supports for communities in Alberta. These CCRs obviously were unique to each community. Each community then was unique in that it had geographic, cultural perspectives, including those with First Nations, with immigrant newcomers, and more specifically within our rural and remote communities. So even now today, our CCRs, there's some foundational pieces that each CCR has, but each community developed their own with what was in their community. So we know that AHS is at the table, so home care. We have senior serving agencies, we have police, we have victim services units, social workers within the community, we have financial institutions, so banks are a part of our CCRs, we have senior centers, and church communities. So it was drawing on the needs of the community to help develop what those CCRs were going to look like. The older adult determined what services they wanted and they needed. And what it did is it allowed for the older adult to pick and choose what services that they wanted, and they didn't have to repeat their stories, which was really useful for older adults when they were accessing services that they were looking to be able to resource. Then in 2019, there was a toolkit for CCRs that was developed. The CCR, which you can access now online through the Alberta government website, established criteria for putting together a coordinated community response model. And part of the work that was done during that period of time is the existing CCRs were able to provide feedback about what was working, what wasn't working, ways that they found useful in pulling the CCR together. Next slide, Jenna. Then in 2021, Building on the existing CCRs, we now included the role of case managers. And the case managers there were to lead the responsibility of what elder abuse work was. So the case manager would walk alongside that older adult and work on areas of emotional support, risk and safety elements along the way, just providing that supports as well as the network of supports. Those collective community responses where we have now a case manager and service providers really provide wraparound services for the older adult. That has made a difference in the feedback that we've been getting about how an older adult can access supports in the well-being of the situation that they're in experiencing elder abuse. CCRs, again, like I said, allow access and they don't have to repeat their stories. The other thing that we're finding is because there's three different elements, we look at the awareness piece for CCRs, we look at prevention pieces, and then we look at the intervention pieces as a whole connected response within our CCRs. So some of them, like we talked about, are doing NFF presentations, but they're also doing groups for older adults. So healthy relationships with your adult children in conjunction with the community partners that are service providers within those communities. The other thing that case managers are doing at this point is they're collecting stats. So on our website, on the Alberta Elder Abuse Awareness Council website, is the information. We've had the spring collection, so that would have been 6 months of services that CCRs and case managers have done, and we're just wrapping up this year end to be able to say how many seniors were provided services through our supports through case managers and the CCRs that they're a part of. And that will be out shortly. Next one. So in terms of a chronological order here, the CCRs, like I said, were in place between 2015 to 2018. And then our first year of grant funding from the government of Alberta was in 21 to 22, where we did our first role of case managers in community. We're just wrapping up our second year, which is funding that we received from the Ross Grant funding. So recovery-oriented system of care. Case managers were able to provide supports to the older adult themselves who was experiencing elder abuse, as well as family, and the alleged offender was able to get referrals to the different resources. That made a huge difference for our seniors, knowing that there were case managers who could also provide some supports to son, daughter, whomever else was in the situation that would require support. Just recently, we've got 3-year grant funding. So we've started the first of 3, where we have 13 communities that are currently being funded. The goal then for the next 2 years is to add an additional 5 communities each year that are coordinated community responses, as well as case managers. So our hope is by the time the grant funding comes to its end at 2026, we will have between 25 and 30, hopefully, case managers and CCRs that are funded across the province. Next slide, Gina. So what we found is increased creation of local elder abuse community resource or response resources. So the benefits of having these teams of those people working together with seniors, what our experience is that we have a team that has the strengths in their own roles. So an older adult can access those supports with very minimal effort. And again, they're not having to do it on their own, and there's a network of support. There's a team of support. When we look at increased collaboration among CCR partners, it served to create an increase within those collaborations because there was a common link. and that common link was elder abuse. When they did some surveys, with the CCRs, what they found is it was an effective way to be able to address the issue of elder abuse. It reduced service duplication, and it created stronger communities to achieve better outcomes. The last point there is increasing the understanding of elder abuse among CCR partners. So the community then determined the knowledge of elder abuse collectively as partners in addressing the issue of elder abuse, which made a huge difference. What we're still working on is that just currently we've started a CCR community of practice to determine the standard of practice across the province. So that looks at current grant-funded CCRs and case managers, that looks at the original 2015 to 2018 group of CCRs, and it also facilitates an invite to new communities across the province if they are interested in establishing a coordinated community response to collectively come together and to use the learning of the other CCRs that have worked along the way since 2015. The other thing that we're finding is that we need to continually add partnerships in our rural, remote communities. Some of those communities don't have access to all the supports that a larger community would have. So I see them developing workarounds that establish ways to address or provide supports around mental health. For example, using the awareness intake line that's here and available in Alberta. And the last piece that I will address is that we continue to work with the GOA, with the government, around Alberta strategies for preventing and addressing elder abuse. And I think it's been said by many presenters today, we continue to work on addressing the issue of awareness of what elder abuse is. We continue to do our taking action against elder abuse, and that's training skilled providers and service providers across the province in what elder abuse is, how to respond to it, or how to make referrals to case managers in your community. And again, coordinated community response, critical pieces in being able to collectively address the issue of elder abuse across the province. Working on protective laws and policies, again, collective. And our last piece is, as has been said, there isn't a lot of data information about elder abuse. So we have been collecting stats as best as we can. We're working with the GOA at this time to look at a standard that will make a difference in collecting same pieces of information across the province to ensure that our information data clearly identifies what we're seeing with regards to elder abuse. So that's CCRs in Alberta, kind of in a nutshell, quick. Thank you then, Jenna.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for the overview of CCRs. What a fantastic model and work to date and in future. So we look forward to keeping tabs on how that unfolds with the government of Alberta's investment. So thank you so much. I'm going to transition over here, and I'm just going to pop up the other PowerPoint, but our last speaker is Susan Walsh, Newfoundland Labrador's seniors advocate. So another thing that we found was that, and I believe it was Bénédicte who mentioned, we do only across the country have 3 provinces who have seniors advocates offices, and recommendations that we analyzed do call for more jurisdictions, or all jurisdictions, including a federal advocates office, to be established. So could you highlight, Susan, the Newfoundland Labrador Seniors Advocates Office, the work you do, and provide our audience with a bit of context around that? So I'll share my screen as well as your presentation here.
Certainly, I can let you know, Jenna, when to put up the slides if you want.
Oh, sure. Do you want to start without the slides first?
Well, it'll just be a moment. So okay. I just want to say good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. And yes, Jenna, you're absolutely right that there are 3 seniors advocates in the country: British Columbia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And while we all have the same goal and role of advocating on behalf of seniors, our offices are all structured somewhat differently. So in answering the question, what's the role of the seniors advocate, I'm going to really focus on the office in Newfoundland and Labrador. I will say that in Newfoundland and Labrador, the seniors advocate is an independent office of the House of Assembly. So I don't report to government. I don't report to a minister of the government. I did before I came into this job for 32 years. So you can imagine how enlightening it was to have the opportunity to be able to say what needs to be said on behalf of seniors. The authority for my office comes from the Seniors Advocate Act, which came into force in this province in 2017. And I'm just thinking about the question I've been asked, about my role. Perhaps the best way to give that to you this afternoon is to review my powers and duties through my legislation, and then provide some examples as I review the legislation of the kind of things we're doing as a start. So yes, Jenna, if you could put up the slide now, that would be good. Next slide. Okay, so the Seniors Advocate Act in Newfoundland and Labrador really outlines my powers and duties as a seniors advocate. And the first one there is to receive and review matters related to seniors. And so this office does not have investigatory powers, but I can review matters. And so those matters I can look into myself, or they can come to my attention and then I'll look into them. And I'll just give you one example. I mean, there's many, but food insecurity in this province is a significant issue. And many community partners were coming to my attention, saying to me, Susan, we're seeing more and more seniors at the food banks, religious organizations were telling us how much they were struggling, and we were getting a lot. Plus, of course, we were hearing ourselves at our office from seniors directly around how do we get support. And so many of you would know even that Food Banks Canada came out with a report recently. It identified that use of food banks is up for seniors. But most importantly, I suppose, for my office is that the greatest number of seniors in the country using food banks is in Newfoundland and Labrador. And so this is an area then that we were able to say, okay, this is a systemic issue. It's not an individual, because we don't have individual advocacy functions here. We have systemic advocacy functions. It's a systemic issue. It's very broad to seniors in the province, and we were able to review it. And it did feed into a report we released recently, which I'll talk about in a moment. We're also able to initiate and participate in reviews related to seniors. So, prime example of that would be my office called for a review of our long-term care and personal care home system, given the so significant and horrendous stories we were receiving from seniors and their family members around their care in many homes in this province. And so we did call publicly for the Minister of Health and Community Services to conduct a review, and he subsequently has started that. And we call for our office and other community organizations who are involved in the area of care for seniors to be part of that process. And that is a piece of work that's moving forward, and we're happy to say we're part of that process. So that's the part around initiating and participating. As it relates to conducting research related to seniors and including interviewing and surveys. So a great example of that, when I first came into this office, which is only a little over a year ago now, June of this past year was a year. And, first thing we wanted to do was get out there and hear from seniors on what they are telling us is important to them. And so we embarked upon a full engagement process, which saw 15 community consultations, online consultations, and a survey. And I'm pleased to say that the response rate was remarkable. We received responses from over 1,000 individuals in the province, specifically 1,100 of which were seniors themselves. And as a consequence of the response rate, it was a 95% confidence interval. And so as a consequence, we're able to pretty well say it's very representative of the province. And finding in that, many findings of that, and we're working through, analyzing that data and putting out recommendations, which is another piece our office can do. But at the end of the day, one of the findings was that 32% of seniors in Newfoundland and Labrador were experiencing issues with not having enough money to afford the necessities of life, to pay for what they needed to live. Excuse me. So that's an example of things we can do around consultations. In addition to that, of course, we are able to go out and meet with seniors. I think we visited over 40 communities last year. Again, this year we're into meeting with seniors in community, and then getting their perspective, their reality. Newfoundland and Labrador, while not a huge population, is very sparsely populated. It's a big geographic mass. So the issues that seniors face are very different from region to region, and we need to understand what that is. The next one is related to requesting information. So we have power in our legislation. We have power to ask for information, and it must be provided. And so, 16E relates to the fact that we can't get personal health information, but if you go down to 16.2, we can get pretty well anything else. So if we ask government department, agency for information to help inform the work we're doing, it must be provided if it's in their custody control. The next piece there with respect to making recommendations to government agencies, but not just government and government agencies, to service providers, to community groups, which is very broad power. And so we can make recommendations regarding legislation, policies, programs, services, all those things that impact seniors to try and improve services for seniors. And so we have released recommendations certainly regularly. We as well track those recommendations, and then we'll report on the status of if they're being followed up. And I'll just give you an example of that. When I talked about the consultations we did and the significant finding about the low socioeconomic status of so many Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and of course we all know that the impact that can create related to risk for abuse. And so we did recently, last week actually, release a new report to really get at the cost of living issues for seniors in this province. And, that is a significant piece related to this office. We're able to release reports. We're able to release them publicly with recommendations to make real change for seniors. And the change can be at the policy level, the program level, or at the legislative level. So it's a great place, and it comes with a fair bit of responsibility to ensure you're well representing the seniors in the province. And then, of course, we can inform the public about the work that we're doing, about our own office, but as well about systemic issues for seniors. And, example that comes to mind for me on this one is tied to, of course, the low socioeconomic status for many people in this province, seniors in this province. We certainly wanted to make the issue of homelessness in the province an issue that people were aware of. And while homelessness has been in the media as of late for the last few months, it's been an issue we've been reviewing for many, many, many months. And we have a new phenomena happening in this province where more and more seniors who were never homeless have become homeless because of the lack of affordable housing and the increase in rent. And so evictions are happening and seniors can't afford the rent. And so we work with many community organizations in this space to try to identify what are the potential solutions, and then how do we hold those who have authority to do something about this, i.e. government, accountable in that. And so we did take some measures in that vein. So with respect to what the role of the office is, that will just give you a little bit about the work that we do as an office and our powers and consequently the first piece, I guess, of the question, Jenna, you've asked. I've covered the role of the seniors advocate and some of the things we do to fulfill it. I'd like to focus now a little bit further on the mechanisms we use to address systemic advocacy issues like abuse. My office hears from many, many seniors and their families regarding all types of abuse and mistreatment, unfortunately. My legislation, as I said, doesn't allow me to do individual advocacy, so we assist with providing information, referral, support, those kind of things. However, we do address the systemic issues that influence abuse. And if I could ask you, Jenna, to put up the next slide. So it will be no surprise to anyone that ageism is a significant issue impacting abuse of older adults in the province, and ageist views are often the root of many instances of abuse. So just thinking about the mechanisms that seniors advocates have at their disposal, and in addition to the ones we've already talked about, so education, awareness, and the media. And the media is a very important piece around getting the message out. And I'll just give you an example. We recently, in the last year or so, we had many scenarios in the media about seniors who were taken advantage of from a fraud perspective, scams, but as well by their own family members. And we had one very I got to give a lot of credit to this one person who actually charged her family for abuse as it relates to her finances. And I was interviewed at the time in the media and really try to do my best to get the message out there that don't allow yourself to be taken advantage of, that even well-meaning family members unfortunately can sometimes do these things while you will never think that they might. And so as a consequence, trying to give some advice around things you might do, making sure you have more than one family member on your bank accounts if you're going to have a family member, those kind of just simple little things that can make a difference. And of course, again, working with the community in this area to, what are they seeing and what are some of the things that might help. The next one, just checking my time here. I'm not going to cover these all because I know I'm running out of time, and I know you folks want time for questions as well. So I'll just talk a little bit about two others. The isolation piece, I do want to say that a fair piece of work that we do, and that I do as a seniors advocate, my office does, is working at all levels of government around how we can influence policy and programs. And so, you can imagine what that is at a provincial level. I've already talked about recommendations. Seniors advocates, we meet with the federal minister for seniors. We've met with the previous. We've got a meeting come up with the current, to try to influence those things. But we also work at a municipal level. Every time I go to a community in this province, I try to meet with the municipal government to say, these are things that your seniors are experiencing, and here's some of the programs, models, things out there that you could be doing. And certainly talking about age-friendly communities as a big piece of that. And then the other I'll just touch on quickly is the vulnerability piece. Prime example of that really came home to many community organizations is around seniors at risk from unwanted visitors in their own home. And some of this happened during COVID, family members moving in and then they won't move out. And we had many community organizations seeing this, and specifically Seniors NL in our province, who was actually part of the development of this report. Kelly Heiss is the executive director. I noticed she was part of the development. Great community organization, brought to our attention through their network for the prevention of elder abuse, because we have one in this province, and they certainly lead that piece of work, that this was happening. And we heard from so many family members at our office as well. And so doing some collaborative work to try to work with the government, work with police forces, etc., to make change. So the ability to work collaboratively with community and researchers and others, and using the power of this office to be able to move that forward, when lots of times, sometimes some community organizations struggle from being able to speak publicly because they receive provincial funding. So just say in closing, I certainly support the recommendations for all provinces and territories to have a seniors advocate, as the strength of my office lies in the independence that we have because of the legislative authority we have to speak publicly about issues impacting seniors, to advocate publicly and without fear of reprisal or loss of funding, the ability to bring public attention to the importance of issues for seniors and collaborate with community organizations, the recognition by government, media, community, and others that we do bring a knowledge, we can speak on behalf of seniors, and we have solutions. And I get contacted by all of those on a regular basis on seniors' issues. Then the authority to bring forward those recommendations and report when they're not being met. And it is very interesting the kind of power it can have when you report publicly when government's not meeting the needs of their biggest voters. So although the authority of each province, from a seniors advocate perspective, the three that have that is really focused on their provincial issues, we do bring issues to the federal minister as well. I will say this certainly doesn't replace the call for the federal seniors advocate that's in your report. Thank you very much for your time. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Susan. And so we do have a few questions in the chat and a few minutes to address those questions as well. So the first question was put in place whenever Laura, you were speaking. So the question in the Q&A here is, why is there no code for ageism when people have had a problem with that and abuse and want to be helped in human rights tribunal? Can you clarify code, why it is needed, and what it means in this kind of action?
Maybe I'll jump off on that. We'll put my law hat on for a second and then open it up to everybody else. There's a lot in that. Let me unpack it a little bit. So first, let me just build on Susan's point about ageism. So while ageism is not, kind of by its nature illegal, it's certainly not a positive thing, but, if you thought that being ageist was somehow going to, be illegal, no one would be able to buy a birthday card, because if you have a look at some of those horrible, horrible messages in birthday cards, it's obviously something that we have. It's part of our social narrative and something that we're all really working very hard against. But there's a difference between having ageist ideas and implementing those in a particular context and discriminating, the act of discrimination. That now we're getting into kind of the legal sphere, right? So the idea of just being ageist, or somebody making a joke or denigrating somebody based on their age, it's certainly socially inappropriate, although far too agreed upon. But if I was doing it in the workplace or in other type of environment, and I was saying, for instance, you know what? No, Laura, I'm not going to give you this job because you just turned 52. And I think that's too old. And so that's it. You're out of employment. That's going to trigger a number of different things. That's going to be triggering. And you pointed out Human Rights Tribunal as one example of that. That could be a thing. So age is a protected area in human rights. It's also, if you're looking in that federal piece, this is where law gets very confusing, where the charter attaches and where the charter does not attach. Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is also got it as a protected requirement. So if you are actively discriminated against in one of those protected areas, you may be able to right now go to the human rights tribunals in your province or in your jurisdiction, or if you are working in an environment that, or living in an environment that's protected by the charter, you can. So that's kind of the difference there.
Thank you so much. And I do recognize the time is at the end of our webinar, but we do have two quick questions. But if any of the panelists or participants do need to go, we understand. But I believe these are for Joanne. How many case managers are in place? I believe this was during the CCR presentation, and then added on that, what is the background of case managers?
So currently there's 13 case managers that are a part of CCRs across the province. The standard or the expectation of who they hire is left within the community. So the community determines the job description and the specific hiring around that. So those would be the answers then, Jenna.
Fabulous. And we also look forward to, we can share the toolkit that you mentioned that was developed in 2019 as well in this work. So thank you again to all of the panelists for sharing your expertise in these areas. And thank you so much to the participants for joining today to learn more about our report, as well as the work being done by our panelists as well in Canada. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.
Take care.